So when we're out in nature and we want to draw a scene, like for example, this canal side scene, what we can do is we can set up our easel next to our scene in an upright position, and then you can transfer by the method site by size. And what that literally means is you bring your easel as far forward or you take it back to a point where it will fit comfortably on your pad or your canvas. And for this particular scene, I'm using a 1B pencil to draw out. If you'd prefer a HB, that would be fine. What I would do is, if I was in nature, I would scan the scene and I'm going to work out that's how much I need. And I would bring that over to my canvas, and if it fits, that's great. And I'll make a little mark left and right. And once I've got that mark on the left, then I can gauge literally the mark to the right. There it is. So that's my width. So my scene is going to sit in that format there. And now I need my height ratios. So this one's quite straightforward. I could just take a line in line with my knitting needle to the top of the page. But of course, when you're in nature, it might well be that the sky, because it goes onwards and upwards, you know, you'll have to bring your canvas up and down to a suitable situation. Now, for the bottom format, it's the same idea. So now I have literally a box there that I can work within, or a window, like so. And then from here, I'll go into the basic blocking. Now, in the blocking, as I mentioned last week, we start with the basic shapes, a la Paul Cézanne. And that's a really good place to begin, because if we can find the measurement, say from the left-hand side here to the right-hand side of the building there, then I will know that from here to here, I will find to that point there, that building's right-hand side, it's going to be there. From there, I can gauge the left-hand side of that building. And very often, they're not quite as big as we perhaps thought initially. And it doesn't necessarily have to be big, by the way, for it to be an interesting part of the composition. So before I go into the gable end and all of the chimney details and things like that, I'll just simplify this as a box. It's literally a box. That's what a house is. So it's a box shape with a triangular aspect, but there's the top of the roof, not including chimneys, by the way. And that's kind of the bottom that I can see. So there's my first building. It sits within this area here. The second building, which is probably a little bit bigger actually, I can also gauge, and I can gauge that building from this building, which is a nice place to take it from because it's quite far away. Or if you prefer, you could gauge it from the edge of your page, whichever, it doesn't matter. It should be the same. And now I gauge from here, and it brings this building somewhat close to the margin of my page. Now, once I've got that aspect, I can then take a gauge for this area here. So if I use my little pencil thing, the annotation pencil, this is literally the box that I've already made a note of. And now I'm working on this box. So I've got this measurement, I've got this measurement, and now I need to find the top of the roof. And I don't mind if, you know, the roof is at a tilt, there's a small angle there. I just turn it all into a box. a box is good. So just a straightforward box. The bottom of the building is that I can see is going to determine the bottom line, and the top line is the highest point. So there it is. So now I'm going to take a gauge here to find my width. I'll just make sure I'm getting it correct. Sometimes it's better to double check. And there should be a small space between the two buildings. I'm going to double check that I'm getting everything correct. I can see I need a bit more width there. This one can go back. In these initial placements, if we make an error, don't worry about it. Just change whatever is the error, because at this stage, finding an error is a good thing, because it'll prevent us finding many errors later on. And it could just be the thickness of your knitting needle that makes a 2 or a 3 millimeter difference. There we go. That's correct. That one's now correct. And then as a final test, I will, once I've got the roof of my building in, which I believe is level, the top point, the gable end there is the highest point. So I just use that to refer to for the top of the box. They won't stay as boxes for very long. But I actually really like this stage because it gives me a chance to test whether I like the composition. You know, compositions do not have to be amazingly complicated to be attractive. In fact, probably better that they're not. Just looking for a fan brush. Okay, so there is the starting point. That is my two main shapes. As I said, there's a space between the two buildings, and it's a good idea to check to see if you are allowing enough space for those. And I'm kind of pushing it a little bit. I think maybe I'll just take a bit off of this one and give it back to that one, because I would rather have that little bit of a gap. And there we are. That's my two buildings placed. Now from here, we go into the next biggest shape. And the next biggest shape tends to be, I think, looking at this scene, well, the trees are quite small relatively, so it wouldn't be those. But the water, sorry, I'm just having a fight with the control panel. It wants to put something where I want to draw. Just move that over there. Hope it stays there. So the water is quite a large shape, and it's not a regular shape. And as I mentioned before, when we look at the world in the sort of simplistic terms given to us by Paul Cézanne, it's either going to be a box, a circle, or a triangle, or if we want a cube, a sphere, and a cylinder. But it might not be one of those. And if it's not, it's a sum of those, one or more. And at this point, we have this strange box at the bottom, which is the line of the canal. So if I take that bottom line here, sorry, this line here, the line that's at the bottom of the lock there, and take a measurement or a gauge of its height across, a level rather. It's somewhere along this line. I'm not quite sure where yet, but I can determine it because that's the point there that I need to find, or this point on the color version. And I just measured that from the edge of my page, or a relevant point in the scene. That's important to realize. And you'll notice it does, if you get the point correct, it should be a little bit in line with the center of this building here. So from this position, that line there seems to be leading the eye to that corner. So that's good to know. Now I've got that point, I can also gauge to this point. You see here, the width from there to there. And again, is not difficult to achieve. We just take that to there. There we are. The next part, we don't have to gauge so much. We could use a tilt. And so for this, I'd use my knitting needle literally in front of my scene. I would put this onto, I think I can zoom in actually. I'll zoom in a little bit. There we go. Maybe I can push that across there. There we are. And I'm just going to take a tilt for that line of the canal as it moves diagonally towards the lock. So I'll just bring this across so it can be seen more clearly on the screen. Make sure I've got those all in line. And this sort of things happens in real life as well. You'll be painting away, and then your easel will either blow in the wind or it'll drop. So don't be afraid to reset up. Don't be afraid to move things about. It's a bit of a nuisance, has to be said, but you know, I've had occasion where I've had to step down a mountain to rescue my canvas that blew down the valley. These things happen. Right. So what I was about to try to do there was take this tilt to that corner there. So when I look at that, it is a moment on the clock, and I think it's about 10 past the hour. So in my conceptual eye or imagination, if I think about 10 past the hour, it's something like that. And then I put a tilt in. Once I have that tilt, I can then move across to the next one. And I'm just going to mark this line here. Now, I do realize that that is not in reality one straight line, but if I simplify it, it can become that. So if I literally take the direct route from there to there and then substitute it for a moment on the clock, I would say this time it is around about 13 minutes or 14 minutes, somewhere between the two perhaps, past 13 minutes past the hour. So there we go. So now my canal is in perspective. It is going off into this direction. Where to next? Well, what's your next biggest shape? And you'll see that you could be, you know, at odds with which is the next biggest shape. I think it's a wall here behind. This is actually the bridge. And thank you, Philip, for showing us the exact location on the map where this spot is. When I was a boy, I used to walk along this canal quite often, because it was near my hometown. And funnily enough, I knew a girl who lived at the end of the canal. She lived at a farm. So I used to walk along it. It was quite a scary place at night, walking back alone. I was always terrified I might drop in the canal. So I'm now drawing this. It's hard to see on this, but you can see here it is actually a rectangle. And it's got an arch, which is where the canal boats go through. So I now need to find the bottom. So that's the top of my wall, and that is the bottom. Somewhere there, there's an arch. So I can kind of guesstimate that as I would if I was at the scene itself. And hopefully you're starting to get a very basic, if not abstract, composition forming right now. And then we can start to build from there. So where would I go next? Well, there is a line, and I simplify the canal. It's literally a parallelogram that runs from that point there, that corner of the edge of the water, through to the bridge, and the same on the other side. So really, to simplify it as the most basic shape, is a parallelogram that is literally going from this point you've already determined, and this point here, which likely you've guesstimated, but it should be okay as long as you get the tilt correct. From here to here, I would say that is definitely 14 minutes past the hour. If that one was 13, this one is 14. And if this is actually 14, which it could well be, then the one that's running from this corner to the other part of the bridge, so the right-hand side, it is also very close to being parallel, but I like to allow it to converge slightly as it runs away this way. So bear that in mind if you may, and I think it will help you. So these are just very simple, basic shapes. We're going to go into detail soon, but let's just take all that we can. Look at this area here where we have an area of bank, which is grassy, and it seems to just curve from here over to there. You don't need to be too specific with that, I would have thought. So now I know that this is green and this bit here is not. And last but not least, there is here a maintenance dock. So what can happen is they can empty the canal into that there, sorry. They can empty the canal here, water can go into there and dry this area out for maintenance, etc. So there's like a little pit here. And that's also a parallelogram. So this is where it gets a little bit complicated. So what I'm going to do here is I clear the drawing so far. Hopefully you've got most of those in. And then just examine this shape on its own. Because it is, as I say, it's another little parallelogram. With a line here that is almost, if not very close to, 1/4 past the hour. This line is also 1/4 past the hour, almost. And then we've got this line that leads the eye down. We have various fence posts, which just for now, I would ignore. But if you could build this basic shape, and that will lead the eye Now you might need a little bit more help with that one. And if you do, don't worry, I'm going to give you the help you require. So how do we draw this shape? Well, we'll need to know where this corner is ending, and that's on in line with that wall there. Do you see the edge of the wall? So we need to find the edge of the wall. And to do that, we could gauge literally from the edge of that wall to this one, because we already have determined where that one on the right is. So now I just make a mark here. And I have two sides of the building. I have the side here and the side that's facing us. But more importantly, now I have a position to help conjure this parallel, this pit shape, which is a parallelogram. So next I'm going to find this corner here. Now it's hard to determine the corner there. So what I would suggest we do is we let it continue perhaps, and it should be in line with the end of that building there, something like that. That will help. So we already have the end of this building. And now I need to find the level for this line here. That's a lot easier to establish. We just put our knitting needle in line with that. So there it is. I can also put my knitting needle in line with the wall at the back of the trough. And then we simply now, it says simply, we need to find where that corner is there, because that post is sitting on the right angle of the little trough, the maintenance pit, whatever they would call that. Anyway, that's the position there that we need to find, because somewhere along there it exists. And if I find it, it's going to be easy to find by looking at the edge of the building here and then finding that post and gauging it. So I can do that. There it is. So I found that point there, and then all that's required now is to join this point to this point. And then hopefully we've got it right. It should just check that corner there. It doesn't look quite right. Just make sure I've got that level. Yeah, I think I need to come down a little bit. Yeah, that's better. So the building comes down a little bit. Oh yes, that's right. Because this wall at the back is slightly raised for whatever reason. I'm not quite sure. Right, so there we are. We have two boxes for buildings. We have a parallelogram for the pit where they service the canal. We have the bridge. We have the water in front of the canal, basically. We have this green patch and the canal running this way. So far, so good. I hope. Let's just check. So I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, so we have established the side of this building, so that's going to make life easier for us. As yet, we haven't established the side of this building. So we have this bungalow. I guess it's the canal, the canalman's cottage. So if I take that gauge there from left to right, I'll have a line that I can use now. And I'll just double check that I am correct by gauging the other width. And it appears okay, but I think I could stretch it just a little bit to be more comfortable. There we are. Right, so now I need to be a bit more specific about these roofs because they're just far too simple. So we have a perspective, and in linear perspective, what will happen is once you have established the horizon, and it should be, I'm just trying to find a point where this is. Now, a friend of mine took this photograph, and he's quite a tall gentleman, actually. So I am going to hazard a guess in a moment where I think the horizon is, but it's not that essential as long as we get these tilts correct. Now, this tilt, if I was to continue it, would go off alongside the canal until it reaches the vanishing point on the horizon. Now, of course, it's a conceptual line. It really does not exist in nature, but it's good for us because it'll help us to understand how to set. You see, that line also will go off to the horizon. And as that goes off, it's almost straight. So I would say that is about eye level, which wouldn't surprise me because, as I said, my friend David, who took the picture, he's a tall gentleman and he's well over 6 foot something. Yeah, that's right. So that line, I would suggest, is the horizon there. So that means everything that's above that line will tilt downwards towards the horizon. So you can see the roof line there. It's tilting down to the right. This roof line here is tilting down to the right. Maybe not as much gravity in its pitch, but it is going to the same destination. But if we look at the windows here on the cottage, but the bungalow, they're tilting upwards. Do you see that? They're tilting upwards to the right, ever so slightly, but they're going to radiate upwards until it meets the vanishing point, somewhere off screen. So that's very useful. And you can see that also with the line of the canal here, the walkway that's tilting upwards. Everything really is in perspective going to that singular destination. And this is therefore called one point or single point perspective. So last week, when we took on the previous challenge, which was, had its complexities, it didn't have as much of this kind of issue. So now we know where this issue is, we can ensure that we take care of that. So that's good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my tilts to shape the roof, the windows, and anything else that is in perspective. So I'm going to clear off those lines. There we go. And I'm going to start off with this first line here, the roof. I'm going to ignore the chimney as if it were not there, because that can be bolted on later. So how do I find the starting point for that tilt? Well, logically, the center of this gable wall here will give us a point which we can determine as, if I can draw this line straight, is the center of that roof, that gable end. You see from there to there, it's almost like an arrow pointing to that one little point. So if I follow on my wall here, which is halfway to that point there, where they cross, I can now take my tilt down. And what's the angle of the tilt? Well, we can see on the screen there, it's not too far off, 16 minutes past the hour. It's a gentle tilt. So 16 minutes past the hour will give us something similar. That's good. Then we have the next issue, which will be how to work out this angle here. And again, you use your knitting needle, and it's about 20 minutes to the hour this time. So if I get 20 minutes to the hour, there it is. That's a really good way to get ourselves going. And the next one is 20 past the hour, pretty much. maybe 18. There we go. So now I have the gable end. And where that point there arrives here, it also will help me to establish where the starting point is for this line here. And as you know, the roof is kind of parallel from there to there. But remember, we have to obey the rules of, or the principle of linear perspective. So even if this line here is parallel to that line over there, as it goes away from us, this should converge. So this should diverge. So we should be slightly wider here than we are from there to there. In other words, this tilt that I'm about to put in should not be exactly parallel to that. It should be close, but it's starting to converge. So tilt it back a little bit, and you'll find if it's a moment on the clock, if that one was 16 minutes past, this one is 15 minutes plus 30 seconds. I know it's ridiculous, but that's going to give you a relatively tidy convergence at the end. And then this line is very much close to parallel to this. Now, there is another aspect that I should tell you about, which is a bit more advanced, but it's true. The wall plate should be the same length as the ridge line, should be. However, because we are at ground level or at horizon level and the roof is above us, this area of the wall plate, the lower line, is closer to us. And because of that, the one that is furthest away will appear to be just slightly smaller. So these two parallel lines do go up to those points, but the convergence this time is at the top, just fractionally. So if you have a tilt here that I said was maybe 18, 19 minutes past, the next one, you could make it very close to that corner, but just pull it in a little bit, and that will take care of that natural convergence at the top. Okay. So there we are. I now have my little cottage seemingly in perspective. I'll just change my seat because I've moved this over and I'm still drawing from the side, which can be a problem. So I'm happy about that building. It's looking much better now. And then once I've got that, I move on to the second. And it's going to be the same process. So how do I find this point here? Well, it's halfway, pretty much. It won't be exactly halfway, but for this exercise, we can pretty much guesstimate it as halfway. And if you don't trust that, you could gauge it. But I'm going to say it is pretty much halfway. And then I'm going to take a tilt for this line here. And for that tilt, I believe it's not far off, 20 minutes to, again, it's very similar to that one, perhaps just a little bit further back, 21 minutes to maybe. And then once you've got that one, you have the mirror image really, which is this roof here. So we've got that arrow shape coming out again. And if anything, this corner of the wall plate is slightly higher than that one that's closest to us. That's all. That's the only major difference or minor difference. Just get a better brush because that little thing's too small. Okay. Now that was all setting up where I'm going to go to next. And where I'm going to go to next is the tilt on the roof there. Now, of course, when we're out and about painting, you know, if you're on your holiday in Italy or painting wherever you are in your locality, these principles will apply there too. So this is basically a good instruction on how to sketch scenes from life. But of course, it will speed up because once you get the idea of this, especially if you're, you know, beginning with this sort of hobby, you'll find that it's a bit slow at the beginning, but it will speed up. You will get your confidence the more you do it. And the payback is lovely because what will happen is you'll have a lovely journal of your exercises and people will see them. And even if you don't show them, you'll know that they're starting to progress and you'll have more confidence the next time you go out. Now, I did mention that this bottom line here is actually at eye level. So it is, when something's at eye level, it's at the horizon level. So if I didn't mention this, your eye determines where the horizon is. Whether you're sitting, standing, or even lying down, doesn't matter. If you look straight ahead, that's where the earth turns away from us, the curvature of the earth, that is the horizon. So it's at eye level, your eye level, in this case, the photographer's eye level. So now I have to determine the end of that roof there. And that I can gauge literally from one gable to the other. And once I've done that, I can trust myself just to bring that line down from there to there. And then just check that it feels correct on your eye. And if there's anything that's not feeling correct, then you can adjust. And I always say that at any point you can squash, squeeze, stretch, pull, drop, move up, anything that feels not quite how it should be. Right, now we have our main shapes in now. That's good. Before we go into details such as chimneys, I would suggest that we put our trees in. So what do the trees look like? Well, they're going to be a basic shape. Trees, especially in winter and autumn, when they shed the leaves, they become almost like leaf shapes themselves. They're like a giant map of what their leaves will look like generally. There's that kind of shape to them. So with that in mind, you do have a lot of freedom. You might want to just suggest where the canopy ends at the top. So you could put a little line like so. And then start to draw that basic leaf shape. And this is just an outline. It's a perimeter. I would call it, you know, a parameter really, because what it's doing is it's telling us where we'll bring the branches out to, but no further. So I just sketched that as a sort of envelope for my tree to reside within. There's another group of trees there, or bushes, shrubs, or whatever that is over there. And it's kind of like a big mushroom shape. So I just stretch that down into there. The other trees, which are sitting behind the roof there, they're a little bit lower. I can kind of guesstimate it by eye, but if you feel that the urge to use the knitting needle when you're out and about, I sometimes, even if I'm not teaching, I'll bring the knitting needle with me just to make sure I get those positions, because I can, and it's easy to do. It's always better to be safe. So there's the basic tree shapes or envelopes for those basic tree shapes. And believe it or not, we're gradually getting there now. It's not too far off, but we do need to put those chimneys on. I noticed that one or two have already done that, so that's good. And they're literally boxes sitting on the top like that. But they also obey the principle of linear perspective. So if I clear all of those drawings now, and if I were to put a line from this corner here to this corner here, it would follow through that that line should meet at the horizon, and we call that the vanishing point, of course, just like this line would, which is the horizon line. It's going to meet and vanish in line with that. And so too with the chimney pots sitting on the top there, they should go down, but it's not so important because they do have various heights. So hope that helps. So what is the tilt between there and there? Well, I would suggest it's about 18 or 19 minutes past the hour. Very close to being parallel to the line of the ridge, but not quite. And I just sketch that in, simple as that. As long as I make them standing upright in, you know, a plumb position, and then square them off at the top. I can draw the little chimney pots. Such fun to put these little details in finally. And by this point, you've started to earn the delightful reward of putting details in. So what details next? Well, we've got the chimney pots and that looks okay. Well, maybe it could be a bit bigger. It's quite big chimneys on these, must be cold houses. And like mine. Now we've got the windows to put in. Now the windows, there's luckily for us, there's not many windows on these houses, but that one there, it does have a bottom sill, but the top lintel is in line with the wall plate, which is great because it means you don't have to draw it. But this one tilts slightly down to the right, slightly down. So it's above the eye level. Remember, we do know that this is the eye level. This is the horizon. I just sketch it in just so that you can see it on my drawing. There it is. So if I've got windows below the horizon now, well, they're going to tilt slightly up to the horizon. That's the difference. So there we are. So I draw the second window in, and both of those are kind of tilting slightly up to the right. And if this is in line with this one, then I can drop in another window here. I know there's another sort of, I don't know if it's a smaller window or a little sign on the wall, but I'll just leave it as 3 windows. I think that is enough for our purposes. So that's what I'm going to leave that as. But on this building, there are 2 windows. And first of all, I just drop in the verticals or the mullions, as they're referred to. And they're below the horizon. So this line is going to tilt upwards ever so slightly, but it's important to make sure it does tilt upwards to the right. And then the last window, which is somewhere in the center of the wall there, also follows a similar line here. So that trajectory, once you've worked it out, will help on this one. So you can see now it becomes not only logical, but a lot easier once you understand those tilts and how they can speed up your drawing and your overall goal of more accuracy. Now, there is another little lean-to building. I just make sure I am recording. Yeah, I'm still recording. That's good. And it is between the two buildings, there's a lean-to. So someone's built a little, probably a sunroom there. Fat chance of any sun in that, along that canal. It does look very icy. So we have a little wall there and then a tilt going up. That slight slope, we can estimate it, I think. Probably about 13 minutes past the hour. And there we are. So we have gradually blocked in our scene. Now, there are other details, of course. We've got lots of little posts. Just trying to think. Yeah, it's probably not a bad idea to actually put some in. I think what we'll do is we'll put the main ones in for now. We've got this post here. This little post is important to the canal because you wind the you can wind that gate open there with that. So we have like two sluice gates. And the water level drops actually from as you go from Coventry to Birmingham. There is a slight change in the camber of the landscape, so it's a little bit lower the other side. So they fill this water, they fill that up with water. The boat will come into there, and then you wind this down. The sluice opens down here, lets the water out. And then the canal, the barge can travel along the canal at the same level. So these two things are pretty much important, essential items. And anyone who lives along the canal or has been on a boat will know all about these sort of things. So we put them in. We may not put all of the detail in, but we'll put this one in here. And it's easier to establish this one because it's to the left of that line there, which is where the gate is, if you like, the lock gate. And then the other post, well, it's very close to being in line with the edge of that wall, do you see? So we can use our eye to gauge where that one will be. It's a bit further across than, and it also seems to poke up all the way up to the edge of that, the little drop into the canal, the other side of the bank or the canal network line there. So whatever that's called. So there we go. I've got two posts. And like I said last time, when you've got the big shapes in, the little shapes start to take care of themselves. You'll see that. So the next big shape, I would say, if I simplify it, is this shape here. It's kind of like looks like a pipe. And it's a very long, thin rectangle that goes very close. It's a lot longer than, one would probably expect. It goes all the way very close to that winding post where you have the gear, something like that. That's good. And then attached to this, which is actually a walkway across this side of the bank to the other, this is where you find the beam. Now, the beam if anyone has been on a canal boat, you will know you have to push this beam. Once you've wound the sluice gate open, the water will flow. And then once you have the water be at the right side of the beam, you can open it. And it's a long, huge, heavy piece of oak, usually something like that, oak or chestnut. They paint it with bitumen, so it always looks black. But they put a bit of white on it because people come along at night cycling and tend to get knocked off their bike by that. I shouldn't laugh because I used to cycle on there. So that's painted white, so you can see it. But it is a tremendously heavy piece of wood, and it's very, very old. I have no idea how old that is. But there it is. So I've got that beam, and that also has a tilt. It kind of tilts upwards a little bit, maybe towards 14 minutes past. And so now I've got some of the essential details which will make sense to canal folk, and also looks good on the eye because suddenly we are shaping this up into a more interesting composition. So where to from there? Well, from there, there's many ways you could go because there's lots of very small details, such as fence posts. But I would tend to think the next place to go would be the other lock gate. And you can see them here. There's two wooden doors. They look like two rectangles. And they occupy the space along the canal there, just to the side of the bridge. Like so. And there is also two more winding posts, one there and one there. This time I think they're a bit smaller actually, but anyway. And then you've got the post, this beam that comes out. In fact, you have two. There's one either side on this one. One there and one there. So I'm going to put those in now. So how much detail do you actually need in a composition like this? Well, actually, not much more than what we've put in. And when you look at it that way, that's not a lot of detail, really. It's the composition really functions on the position of the perspective point on these two houses as they go off. But these posts bring our eye back in to the canal, which is actually what everything centers around. Everything's around this canal. And literally, everything that's around it points us back into its direction. So it's an interesting one because the eye just busily moves around constantly. There's not a lot to it when you break it down, but what there is enough to keep us occupied in this drawing. Okay, so once you've got your two posts at the back and the lock gate, and then this post here, then I think it's safe to say, oh, I'm getting a cup of tea. That's very nice. Thank you very much, Anna. We can now move on to looking at other areas. So we're almost there, really. We really are very close now to blocking in with our first value. But maybe we could have another look at this area here. Remember, we just did this kind of shape that's not quite a triangle. Well, when we really look, there's actually a little bit more to it than that. This line stops there, and then it changes direction and goes up to there. So there is a slight deviation there, and it's worth noting because it means we add a small amount of angle here, which in a way is very useful and very necessary in this composition. I'll explain why as we put it in, because when it was a straight line, the eye just travels directly through, and there is that danger. But now I've got this addition, the eye slows down.
Oh, that's fine.
So we've got a little bit of a break there. It gives us more time in the composition. So place that in. And then once you've placed that in, we can now start to think about the dark shapes. So I'm going to look at the dark shapes next. Just going to quickly look through my drawings because I've got an example of it. Yeah, here we are here. So from here, we can literally start to block in all of our dark shapes. When we do this, what will happen is we end up with a cartoon, literally black and white, and it's the essential details within it, the essential contrast within it. So that's where we're going to go to next. But before we can do that, I want to point out something. There's a shadow running along this gable wall. And it's coming from the trees to the side. There's also a shadow coming across that wall there. Now, they're not the most darkest shadows, but I'm going to choose to link them into the shadow map at the start because it might make life a little bit easier. And also, you'll notice here that this group of trees here is a little bit heavier in its density than that above. So I will also link that in my initial blocking as I shade in the darks for my first tonal layer. Okay, but I'm just going to pause there because I know that some of you will want to catch up with where I've got to. And once everybody's at this stage, then we can start to shade in. So hope that it's not too complicated at the moment and you're enjoying getting your drawing set. If you've already got to this point and you're ready to start to shade in, well, there's no reason why you couldn't. Although you might want to wait. And if you are stuck for something to do while I have a look at everyone's work, you could start to draw perhaps these little V shapes in the trees. Remember that this is the envelope, so that's my parameter. But I can see there's like a Y shape going up, kind of like that, where it branches out. And so I could start to simply draw the skeleton of the tree, very much like early Mondrian, as I've said before when we've done trees, perhaps, that adopt, a very abstract notion of the tree before we then go into bringing it to life. Right, I'm going to pause again, check everyone's all right, check the